Hello everyone, hi, I'm Jan or Jonathan Sandler, and some of you know me on YouTube as Ibolit. Um, this is my third generation testimony for the Holocaust Memorial Day. For those of you who are not familiar with the term third generation memorial, let's make it simple. A first generation testimony is when someone who in fact survived the Holocaust, who was there, tells his story. Not so many people from that generation are alive right now. I mean, if they were teenagers during the Holocaust, they would be about 90 years old right now. A second generation testimony is when the children of the survivors give the information, and that is not very common because the survivors themselves, they didn't usually tell the story to their children because they didn't want to traumatize them. And the way I give you the information is a third generation testimony. That means that I'm a grandson of a survivor and I'm gonna tell his story. This is more common because the third generation kinda was ambitious enough or sometimes just has the means to look for the information. So my testimony is on behalf of my late grandfather. This is my grandfather holding me 34 years ago. My grandfather, PUKIN, who was born in 1922 in Druja, it's in northern Poland, and died in Israel in the year 2000. So I'm gonna tell the story of his family as he never knew. The thing is, my grandfather had the luck to escape Riga in the right moment, a day before the Germans arrived. And actually, that means he was lucky enough not to go through all the harsh things, the murder and the conditions that his family had. So let's begin. When I was a child, during the Holocaust Memorial Day, and I was told the number 6 million Jews, it's a great number, no one could imagine this number, not a child nor an adult. So I thought only on the names that I know of. These were the people I knew of when I was a teenager. There was this guy, Moshe Sandler. He is my grandfather from my father's side, and the family of my other grandfather, Nachman and Emma PUKIN, his parents, and his three sisters, Rachel, Frida, and Judith PUKIN. I knew these names, I knew he was shot, I knew he was shot, and I knew they drowned. That's all I know, and actually that's all my grandfather knew because he wasn't there. Now the thing is that today I had the chance, the luck, I don't know what, to find information, documents, testimonies, video testimonies, books like this one, who mention members from my family, and I could build this picture like a detective with the photographs and threads on the wall. Where were they and what were they doing during the Holocaust? So my grandfather's family arrived to Riga from northern Poland around 1926. This is a picture from 1936 from a few people of the Jewish community in Riga. My grandfather is here in the yellow circle. As you can see, no one wears a hat, and I don't see any beards. That means they were secular. However, I know from my grandfather he had a bar mitzvah and he even sang in the synagogue choir. So they were traditional Jews, as they say, but they weren't religious. They were speaking German and Yiddish in their house, but mainly German. And my grandfather was fluent in German until his last days. And they were pretty rich, which is kind of strange because they were tailors mostly, and tailors and seamstresses don't earn that much money, but they were specialists. Nachman, my grandfather's father, excuse me, had a shop where he was a tailor and he made frak suits. It's something like a tuxedo suit, the suits that orchestra conductors wear with the long tail. And they say that when he finished the suit for a customer, he would step out of the shop balancing the suit on his finger. That means it was done perfectly symmetrical. And many other people in his family were specialists in other types of textile. His cousin, for example, was an expert in leather, and his wife was an expert in dresses, etc. But tailors had a lot of money. They were, I know because I heard it, they were so rich that they didn't know where to hide the gold. So they made golden nails and nailed it in the wooden panels in the apartment for a dark day, which actually came. I also know that they bought land in then Palestine, now Israel, and meant to come here, but that never happened. So that was the situation in 1936. In 1939, the Germans and the Russians, the Soviets, had an agreement. It was the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement. The foreign ministers of the Soviet Union and Germany declared, it wasn't declared, it was a secret agreement, that they are allies. And that means that everything between them, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, would be split in half. Russia gets Latvia. So in 1940, the Red Army crosses the border into Latvia. Here is a photo from that era. Now, a testimony. You see this little guy? This is my grandfather's cousin, Isaac. Itzhak PUKIN. And a day before the Russians came, he heard on the radio that the Red Army is coming. So he runs to his uncle's house and says, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. And my grandfather tells his older sister, Rachel, great, we're going to study airplane engineering in the Soviet Union. Why airplane engineering? I have no idea. All I know that they knew some Russian, and my grandfather probably wanted to be an engineer because he became an engineer later. About a year later, in the summer of 1941, the Germans came to Latvia. Now, when the Germans came to Latvia, you can see the Latvian women greeting the soldiers. Why? Well, actually, the Russians before that didn't treat the local population that good. They were harsh, they were cruel, and they were cruel to Jews too. Thousands of Jews found themselves expelled from Latvia to Siberia, and a big part of them actually died there. So they weren't that good. So when the Germans came, actually the Latvians considered them their saviors from the Russians and their allies. So the Germans are coming, and once again, cousin Isaac runs to his uncle's house and says, the Germans are coming, the Germans are coming. This time he doesn't get a very good reaction. My grandfather's mother, Emma, slaps him in the face and she says, don't even joke like that, it's awful. Now, Isaac didn't know why saying the Germans are coming is that awful. He would soon find out why is that as good. My grandfather fled Latvia. I don't know if it was that day or tomorrow, but the factory where he was working was evacuated by the Russians, probably something having to do with their security, and they were evacuated to the Asian part of Russia, so he was safe. But the family was left behind and with no contact to him. So when the Germans came, this is how Riga, which is a beautiful city, and I really tell you to go there and visit this beautiful city. These are the ruins of Riga. And then the Nazis did something, I don't know, smart in a way. They ordered the Jews to clean the rubble. Okay, so the Jews get to work, they clean the rubble, and then they publish these kind of pictures in the newspaper saying the Jews are cleaning up the mess they made. Or, for example, they would show bodies of casualties of the Latvians from the bombing and say the Jews are carrying the casualties of the communists, which are, of course, their allies, because Jews and communists are practically the same. So, in that scenario, the Germans kind of pulled the local populations toward them with propaganda, anti-Semitic propaganda, and it worked. In the early days of July 1941, Jews were treated badly. You can see some Jews rounded up here by the Germans, and part of them are wearing beards. The Jews that looked like Jews, I mean the Hasidic look, the religious look, were given the worst treatment because, you know, it's like a caricature. And here's a famous picture from Riga with two Latvian policemen carrying a Jew. So here you can see the Latvian police helping the Germans. So what's the point? You see, the leader of the Latvian police, and we'll talk about him, the leader of the Latvian police was a guy named Albert Danskop. He was a sadist, extremely cruel, and the strange thing, he was a medical student. And this happened a lot. Now, when the Germans occupy Latvia, in a few months, they slaughter all the Jews in different small towns and villages, and they gather the Jews of Riga and the vicinity to a ghetto. This is an article from a Latvian newspaper describing that the Jews, 30,000 Jews, are in the ghetto now. You can see the yellow stars on their back. And it's the same in every country in Europe then, the policy of isolating the Jews in bad conditions, of course, and using them as a workforce. Of course, they don't have rights, they have to wear a yellow star, they don't get to walk on the pavement because it's higher than the road, they need to remove their hat if they see a German, etc. Now, the Latvian police, people like Danskop, were extremely cruel, cruel like smashing babies on walls, that kind of cruel. And these kind of things were random in the life in the ghetto. One big event was the burning of the big Choral Synagogue in Riga on Gogol Street. The same synagogue where I told you my grandfather used to sing in the choir. The synagogue was burnt with around 100 people inside. So that was kind of a sign of what's to come. When the Jews were gathered to the ghetto, they were gathered there by a list. The Germans had a list. This list can be found online, and I found it. So this is the house where my grandfather's family used to live. Here's a photograph of me near the house, Maskavas or Letgal Street number 95. And these are the people in the apartment number 8. For the sake of their memory, you know, it's Holocaust Memorial Day, I will read their names. Aviva Rubinstein, she was a child. Achmiel Pukin and his wife Chaya Reitzin Pukin. My grandfather's parents, Nachman Pukin and his wife Emma Levingberg Pukin. Shmuel Reitzin, the three sisters of my grandfather, Rachel, Judith and Frida Pukin. His grandmother, Gita Lea Pukin. His uncle, Ziskind Pukin, and his wife, Rachel, Slovin Pukin. His other uncle, Chatzkel Pukin, we'll talk about him, he was very important in the ghetto. His aunt, Ida Rubinstein, with her husband, Shevel Rubinstein. And two cousins, Hilda PUKIN and Isaac PUKIN. As you can see, Isaac PUKIN is the only one in this picture who hasn't got a yellow badge. That's because he's the sole survivor from this apartment. It's a bit of a spoiler, I know, but what did you expect? The rate of death in the Latvian community was about 95%. There were 95,000 Jews before the World War started. There were a couple of thousands left when it's ended. So here's one survivor, Isaac. So they were there. People who are pretty rich, had businesses, had factories. Uncle Ziskind has a leather factory. Hatzkel is a medical student, pretty intelligent guy, all gathered in a small apartment, 17 people for an apartment. The average was 20 people for an apartment there. There were other apartments with Pukins around. I won't mention them here, but they were in the ghetto. Now, the thing about this apartment also, that they were all related, and that probably made life, I don't know about easier, but mentally easier for them. You know, being in trouble with someone you already know, who is your uncle or aunt, may be better, I don't know. But the conditions were pretty harsh. The man would soon get out to work, and when I mean work, I actually have to talk about the Uncle Hatzkel. This is Hatzkel. He has a picture of his own. Hatzkel or Arseny or Asya Pukin. Most of them had several names because one Jewish name and one Russian or Latvian name. So Hatzkel was a medical student. He was born in 1911. He was a good-looking guy, kind of looks Italian, and fluent in many languages, and he had a good connection with the German headquarters. I don't know why, I don't know how, but he managed to get a job for himself and his brothers and cousins in the German headquarters. That's a big thing. That means survival for a few months or maybe years. And why? My guess is, remember the cruel guy, the leader of the Latvian police, Danskop? Born 1911, medical student. My grandfather's uncle Hatzkel, born 1911, a medical student. Maybe, and this is only my guess, they've known each other and had some sort of a decent relationship. So, when they work at the headquarters, they have some better conditions. For example, on the apartment, on the doorstep of the apartment of the Pukin family in the ghetto, they had a sign signed by the commandant, the leader of the ghetto, the German officer, saying, "Do not rob this apartment. If you touch this apartment, you will be severely punished by us, the Germans." So that is weird. He had some connections. These connections might come in handy. So people lived in the ghetto. The men worked outside the ghetto in many jobs known as commandos. Commandos are groups of people who worked in different specialities, electricity or tailors or engineers, etc. And one day the Germans decide that they had enough. That day was the 27th of November 1941. On the 27th of November 1941, signs appear on the streets of the ghetto, which was by now barbed wired and closed. The ghetto will be terminated and evacuated. Please bring your belongings. I don't know if the word please was there. All Jews of the streets, this and that, have to be arranged in columns on the 29th of November 1940 at dawn. Bring your belongings, you're going to a new place. So that's what they did. The Jews were arranged in columns. About 24 hours before that, the German decide that some people need to survive. They take about 4,500 men as a workforce and about 300 women, seamstresses, tailors. I don't know why they needed tailors, but that was the German decision. And hide them, arrest them, put them somewhere else. And then the action begins. Action, or action, more accurate in English, would be an operation, is never something good. An operation of the Germans to destroy, a massacre, to destroy people. So the Germans decide on a massacre. These people on the 29th of November 1941 are led in columns to the gates. There, blue buses take them to the Rumbula forest, where all of them are shot. About 15,000 people were shot there. About 1,000 people was shot in the ghetto during the arrests and the mess and the screams. People describe this event as a mixture of ice, mud, and blood, because remember, it's the end of November in Latvia. Latvia is in northern Europe. It's cold, it's freezing. So the roads are covered with frozen mud and blood, and people are being led outside. Except for this, for about 5,000 people, of which the Germans kept for, I don't know, another time, another chance. This is a picture of some of the people going in the columns. This picture was taken from a window outside of the ghetto, and you can see the people, some of them have luggage. It can be found on the side of Yad Vashem or the American Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. A day afterwards, the ghetto is half empty, and people are expected to go back to work as normal. They are ordered to clean the mess, clean the corpses from the pavement, clean the apartments who were cleansed, and slowly Jews from Germany come to live in these apartments. This was a German plan. The Jews from Germany had a little better conditions. They were called Reichsjuden, like Juden from the Reich, Jews from Germany, and they were considered more loyal. Part of them served in the German army in World War I. So they got the apartments of the killed Latvian Jews. They didn't know that, they figured it out much later. And then, 10 days later, on December 8th, once more, the Germans have the same action, the same command. Everybody step out, columns of 1,000s go to the buses. The people that the Germans wanted to save, the women, are ordered to go to a building named, the building on the street Ludza 66. The building is at the gate. You can see the gate of the ghetto, which is called the Prager Tor, the Prague Gate, I don't know why. And this is the building. I will show you the building soon. So they are hiding there. The Germans know that they are there. The Latvian police knows that they are there. And the Latvian police sends a brigade of Jews to clean the houses, to settle them, and to turn on the heating. That is absolutely strange, because not only a workforce of men survives, they weren't even there. It's only women. The 300, between 300 and 500, it's an estimate, seamstresses, but some of them have their children and grandparents there. Grandparents and children aren't a workforce. How come these people that I showed you before, children and old people, made it? I think it's PUKIN with his connections to the headquarters. He probably got a tip and told them where to hide. So people go there before the massacre begins. nail the doors from inside, say a little prayer of Kaddish for their dead relatives because they are getting to understand what happened. And then comes silence of almost 24 hours. They are in total silence because they don't want the Germans to figure out that they are there, although the Germans probably knew. Isaac Pukin used to tell that during this silence he went to the toilet and pressed the button that, flushes the toilet, and he got yelled at on spot because it's too noisy. They couldn't allow any noise. So they are hiding there about 24 hours, and in midnight, just after midnight, at 12:30, a knock comes on the door. A knock which probably was planned, some sort of a pattern knock. The door opens. A Latvian policeman stands there and says, "It's over, you are safe, you can get out now." A very strange story. This is the building today. That's my wife standing near the building. It was pictured about a year ago. And they hid in this building, and the gate was here, just under the nose of the Germans. They could hear the shots, they could hear the engines from the buses, and they could hear other women, mainly, trying to enter the building and being dragged outside. So the Latvians kind of knew what was going on. It was some kind of a deal. God knows what was the deal and what they got for saving their families. So now the ghetto shrinks. This is the ghetto after a massacre, the mess. And the ghetto shrinks now. The Latvian Jews get 3 buildings. This is the small ghetto. The German Jews get the rest. A little better conditions. There should be no contact between the Latvian Jews and the German Jews, but the Latvian Jews know Yiddish and German. As I mentioned, most of them are fluent in German, and there is some connection between them. Brigades from each ghetto work here and there. There's a common German Jewish doctor for both ghettos, but the Germans have different units, and you had to have a pass, a note that gives you the permission to go through the gate between these 2 ghettos. They have also a different approach. The Latvian people, the Latvian Jews, lost their families, mostly lost their wives and kids. They're a bit angry, they're less loyal, and in one day they actually want to revolt and start collecting arms. The German Jews say, no, that's a bad idea, don't do that, we will be punished. They're kind of more loyal because their conditions are better. They're still with their families. They, for example, get new clothes from the Germans when their clothes get torn. So it's a bit better, but still cruel conditions and small amount of food and still hard labor. In these 3 buildings where the Latvian Jews live, where people from my family who are still alive, we're talking about 1942, live, there's a problem. It's winter and the sanitation sewage, the pipes, are frozen, with feces frozen inside. You can't go to the toilet, the stench is unbelievable, and they ask from the German authorities to do something about it. Now, the funny thing is that by March, by the beginning of spring, the Germans do something about it. They tell the brigade of engineers, the Jewish engineers, led by a Jew named Antikol, to clean it up. So they invent some kind of a vapor machine that they pull up the stairs and clean up the mess. Why were the Germans so good all of a sudden? They weren't. They just didn't want a plague among their ranks. The people living there are the working force that they chose to survive, so no way are they giving them the option to die just like this. We need to use them, right? So now they kind of help them to install conditions. They even allow the engineers to build bathhouses in the open, but still bathhouses with water to clean up. So some hygiene. And the commandos, the groups of working Jews continued to work and do their job. So we had the engineering commando, and then we had the headquarters commando led by PUKIN at that time, probably with all the cousins and uncles who are still alive. One thing I didn't mention, and I have to mention because it's a beautiful, sad story. Between the Latvian and the German camp, there also were love stories between inmates. One of them actually happened in my family. Arsene PUKIN was married to a woman from the German side. This is a document from camp later, and it says PUKIN born Plapler Albina. Albina was an inmate in the German side. She came from Kassel, Germany, and she married Hatzkel, and they were together practically until the end, and I will tell you the end later. Around spring 1943, the Germans decide, not only in Latvia, that the whole system of ghettos is wrong. We need to have camps. They need to have camps. Work camps, sometimes not only work, but death camps, but not now, we'll wait for it. So they build a large work camp named Kaiserwald in Riga. And it's not one camp, it's actually 15 different camps with crews working on different things. For example, there was a camp that was working for the German electric company AEG, which exists still today, and they would build electric devices. Anyway, in the camps, and I won't show you pictures of barracks and, you know, it's the same, and fences. The conditions sometimes were very harsh with the barracks and the bad food, etc., and sometimes pretty good. There were crews who were meant to serve SS officers and just serve them food and live in the attic of their house, which wasn't as bad. But my family, the PUKIN family, were separated between two camps. One of them was in the camp named Strasdenhof. It was a factory in which they fixed electronic devices. This camp had Isaac PUKIN, his sister, his parents, his grandparents, and his uncle and aunt, who I mentioned were in the same apartment with the other PUKINs. And they worked there on fixing cables for telephone wires and for sewing machines. Why sewing machines, you'll see later. In this camp, by the summer of 1944, August 1944, the Germans decided on an action. Action, once again, massacre. Now, this is a picture of the camp, and this is a graffiti on the wall in the camp, written in Russian. I will read it to you. I will translate it to English. It says, "Read carefully. I am Grafman Abram from Warsaw. Today is August 3rd, 1944. I am here with a group of 900 Jews who were sentenced to be shot. I ask everyone who reads it to give it to the press or the radio so that my relatives would or survivors would know. Straßenhof around Riga." And sure enough, any inmate who was younger than 16 and older than 40 was killed there on August 4th. 2/3 of this camp were killed, and from the family of my grandfather's cousin Isaac, everybody was killed. Now, Isaac was 14. He was smart enough to lie about his age, that he was 16, and he survived that stage of the camps. The other part of my family were in a camp named ABA. It's an abbreviation of a German term. I'll try to read it. Armee Bekleidungsamt, which means Army Clothing Department. Remember, they are tailors and seamstresses. They can fix army clothes. Some are leather experts. They can fix army shoes. Remember the sewing machines fixed in the other camp? That's the reason. Fixing army clothing. And here is something that shook my world. I found a book. I found it online. I read it online and then I just bought the book. This is the book, Churban Latland, The Destruction of Latvia, by Max Kaufmann. He was a survivor and he wrote this book around 1947, a couple of years after the war. It was originally written in German, and this is the English translation. And I opened page 214, and you see the things, the line I marked here? Those killed in the action were the entire PUKIN family. So in August 1944, the Germans decided on action in this camp, and they killed a lot of people. And as this book says, the entire PUKIN family, the entire family of my grandfather, was murdered there. Now, the feeling of reading such a paragraph in a book is unimaginable. And it's kind of mixed with happiness, because I know it's not true. I know that some of them survived. So it wasn't true. Some people died, but not the family of my grandfather. Hatzkel had the chance to survive, and he chose to survive and go to the next camp. We'll soon talk about the next camp. And so is the story about my grandfather's mother and sisters. How about his father? Now, there was a thing during that time, summer of 1944, it's by the end of the war. The Germans understand that the Russians are coming, Red Army is closing in. What do? We transport all the Jews to Poland and Germany, and they needed to remove the evidence. They knew already that they would be probably judged as war criminals. So what they did? They had Action 1005. Now, once again, Action, not good. Action means massacre. Every day, brigades consisting of 10, 20, 30 Jews would step out of the camp and sent somewhere. It could be Rumbula Forest, it could be Bikirini Forest, it could be Salaspils camp, the surrounding camps and sites of murder. There they would dig up corpses, burn barracks, burn documents, and burn the corpses. When they were finished, they were shot. That probably is what happened to my grandfather's father, Nachman. We know that he was killed on August 8th, 1944, in the camp of Salaspils. The camp of Salaspils almost didn't house Jews, so what was he doing there in August 44 by the end of the war? He was probably part of the brigade. Documents say that at the beginning of August, nearby prisoner of war, Soviet prisoner of war camp was exterminated. The prisoners of war were to be shot, and then a brigade of Jews needed to remove the bodies, burn them, and shot. About 60 Jews were killed there, and according to the different documents, probably he was one of them. That's all we know. So that's all I know about my grandfather's father. How about the mother and the sisters? Now, as I said before, in the beginning, my grandfather knew they drowned. How? Well, the Germans moved the Jews from Riga to Danzig. Danzig is a town now a city that is now known as Gdansk. It's in Poland, and then it was a part of Germany. So, in order to get from Riga in the north to Danzig, you needed to take a ship. And many ships, German ships, were torpedoed by the Red Army because they didn't actually know it was ships with prisoners. It's German ship with German signs, German flags, needs to be drowned. So all we know that they drowned in one of the ships on August 8th. So one day I go physically to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, to the Museum of Holocaust, and I search randomly the name PUKIN. Now the name PUKIN isn't that common, so any PUKIN I would find is probably a relative. And then I see the names of grandfather's sisters, and they arrived to a camp. And this is the document I find. And the document I will read it to you in English because it's in German and I had it translated. What the document says is like that. The women from that arrived to Danzig, to the camp of Stutthof, were later transported to a camp named Sophienwalde. In this camp, there were only 500 women from Riga, the only people there at the time of autumn 44, so they were there. And their role was to help build the camp, which was a training ground for SS troops. They were treated not as bad as other camps. They arrived to this camp on a regular train, not on cattle trains like you see in the movies about the Holocaust. And they were told, you will have jobs to do, and if you behave, you won't be shot. Which kind of was not too cruel for that times. They lived in small houses, about 20 inmates per house. The house was wooden with hay stacks on the floor, and they lit a fire in the middle, kind of unsafe, but you needed to keep warm in the northern European winter. And they worked by plowing roots and cleaning roads for, it's a very hard work, but they were women for this, and not so healthy women by that time, for this camp. And now comes the document. The document is signed by a doctor. He is an SS Sturmbannführer, a major, and he apologizes for the death of inmates. What? Why would a German officer apologize and send a letter to his boss, to the headquarters of the camp, explaining the death of 3 inmates? Well, it's strange, and I think the reason he apologizes is because he did something wrong. He couldn't recognize the bodies. So in this letter, he says that this prisoner number 61887 is PUKIN Rachel. She died of measles on December 1944. And we thought it was her sister Judith, who already died in September. We mixed up the information. Oh, how harsh it was. But don't worry, Mr. Officer. I interviewed their mother on January 6, 1945. Doctor said, I interviewed their mother, and in fluent German, she told me the prison numbers of her daughters, and she recognized them. So she identified the bodies practically. And first of all, the idea of a woman, she was 47 years old then, who needs to identify the bodies of her 3 daughters in these conditions, and she is interviewed or interrogated by the camp doctor, And okay, now it's fine. Now we know who died, because we didn't know later. Um, but for me, it meant that, first of all, they didn't drown in the summer of 44, and that Emma, the mother of my grandfather, at January 45, was still alive. So what happened to her? I actually don't know, I can only guess. By the end of January 1944, this camp also was evacuated at a death march. Now, what's a death march? The camp is being evacuated, and the Germans say, look, we are going to walk several hundred kilometers. if you feel you can do it, join us, because the Russians are coming. If you feel you can't do it, you're sick, you can stay here, and the Russians will come, and you'll be fine. So 60 women stay there and immediately get shot by the Germans, unlike what they promised, of course, and the rest get marching. About 350 women went on the march, and 50% survived. So around 200 women from that camp made it. We didn't hear anything from Emma. She didn't contact her son or anybody else after the war. So we can only guess that either she was part of the 60 women who chose to stay and were shot, or she just didn't survive the 120 kilometers of walking in the snow after harsh labor and hunger, when you have practically no muscle in your body. So some young women survived, and I know this story because of their testimonies. So what have we learned from that? I tell you what I have learned. About a year and a half ago, in autumn 2017, I visited Latvia, Riga, with my wife. We went to the Salaspils camp, where, as far as we know, my grandfather's father was killed. And there, I took a bit of land from the pit. That's me digging in the pit. This land later was put in my grandfather's grave in Israel, and we had a plaque with the names of his parents and sisters. Now, there's nowhere to dig for his sisters and mother, because there the bodies were thrown into the Baltic Sea. And for me, according to Jewish tradition, that means they are not buried there, somewhere in Northern Europe, in the Baltic Sea, or in the black, and it is black, land of Salaspils camp near Riga. For me, it means they are buried, symbolically, of course, here in Israel with my grandfather. I joined him. They have a grave. Now, I've told the story of 5 people from my grandfather's family and some more distant relatives. But actually, I have a list of 170 people who were killed. I believe that all Ashkenazi Jews probably have tens of people who were killed in their family, and maybe they don't know them. 6 million Jews, not only Jews, 6 million is an unimaginable number. And the 30,000 people murdered in Rumbula is an unimaginable number. It's a number of people you could see in a stadium. I mean, it's a big number. And you can never imagine that. So every Holocaust Memorial Day, I try to concentrate on several people that I know from my family. I would recommend you to go to visit Yad Vashem website, or if you can, the museum itself, or the museum in Washington, D.C., which is great. And to find out something about someone, whether it's from your family or a distant relative or someone's relative, so you can feel this day not via that vast number of 6 million, but via a personality, a person with a story, with a profession. He was a tailor, he was a shoemaker, he was a barber, he was a doctor. A person who had a family, a person who had feelings, who had connections, who had a love story, who had maybe even bribed an officer. It doesn't matter. He was alive, and then he wasn't alive anymore. But we are. And we are here to remember and to tell the story to the next generations. So that was me telling you this story. Take your time to listen to other stories, not only mine. They're interesting and they give us the more humane experience of something we could learn from the Holocaust. And once again, of course, you always say the same thing, and I totally believe in it. Never again, never again. We are here in Israel, we have an army that could defend us the next time somebody tries. And I totally believe in it. So I'm kind of optimistic after I said that, because we remember what happened and we live on. That's it from me. You are welcome to ask questions and text me, and I will answer whatever you want, including tips about finding information like I did in documents. And that's it. See ya.